That you know, are most people that major in philosophy, are they atheists?
Are most people majoring in philosophy atheists
That you know.
that I know of? Well, there are a couple of things. To some extent, philosophies of life depends on the culture, history, the time in which a certain philosophy is born, on the temperament of the individual who is pursuing the art of reflection, if you want to call it that. It also depends on how you want to define philosophy. If you want to define philosophy as simply an academic branch, or you want to define it as the art of loving, and then how love pushes you towards wisdom. When it comes to atheism, it also depends on the culture. Hello? It also depends on how much doubt you have inside you, who your parents are, what time in history you're born, how curious you are, how doubtful you are. Were you once a religious person, then became agnostic, then became atheist? There have been many atheists who, due to some extraordinary experiences, turned out to be very religious. There are some religious people who turned out to be agnostics and then atheists. So there are lots of variables, and I say this because human beings are living organisms, and as you gain more experiences in life, your outlook about things begin to change. So, if you were to remove philosophy and just say, what is it that perhaps the 21st century creates? What sort of people does it create? What sort of thought processes does our current age produce? Well, to create a relationship with any idea requires time, dedication, devotion, passion, rituals, traditions. And right now, because our culture is so fluid in the sense that the Greek philosopher Heraclitus once remarked that you can't step in the same river twice. If you look at the force of this culture and the way advertisements come and go so quickly, the truth is you can't focus on anything for too long, which means that you can't really have much of a relationship with anything. No idea is going to stay with you permanently. I mean, sure, you can go to church, you can entertain yourself with certain, sorts of entertainments that take place. But for example, for someone like Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher around the 18th century or so, or 19th century, the way he would view Christianity is very much different than the way we view Christianity. And so even if you were to be Christian, for example, you would be a Christian in name, and that's all. Because the culture doesn't support the Christian doctrine, its teachings. Christianity and capitalism just don't mix well. And so you have to kind of figure out how much of a Christian you want to be, for example, how much of a capitalist you want to be. The culture also does not produce and create and sustain faith. It's found in fear, anxiety, dread. There's just too many things. So you could be a person of faith for a few seconds or a few minutes, and then life happens, you lose everything, and then fear overcomes you. So there are lots of things to consider.
So you wouldn't say there's a correlation between the two?
I'm sorry?
So you wouldn't say there's a correlation between the two?
The what?
Like majoring in philosophy, being an atheist?
You don't major in philosophy. What usually happens is, let's say temperamentally from, the age of 5 or 6, when you have a bit of a sense of self about you, you realize you're really closed off to other people. You don't know why. You want to be like your sister. You want to go out there and laugh and have lots of friends. But it's very difficult for you to do that. So you kind of close yourself off. You kind of begin to live in a gated environment, gated community intellectually, even emotionally. And then you gravitate towards books. And it's an interesting phenomenon because you have all these people around you, and yet no one understands you. You don't really understand them. You don't have the language. You don't know why they talk a certain way. You don't know why they smile or laugh or are able to have a good time. So you take refuge in reading books. And then, should you have that particular temperament, as time goes on, what happens is you realize that you want to kind of figure out what is wrong with you. You can either major in psychology or you can major in philosophy. Now, that's one way you major in philosophy. You want to figure out who and what you are. The other is, it's something we've talked about throughout this class, which is, you're moving through your life and it's relatively calm. You know where you're going, what you're doing. And then all of a sudden, you have an experience. You run into a Socrates, or you run into a guy you're attracted to and you realize, yeah, he's doing his master's in philosophy. And most of your boyfriends have been quite shallow, very meaty. And so as you guys spend more and more time together, he makes you curious about certain things. He makes you think. He forces you to use your head a little bit. And let's just say if your temperament happens to be a little fiery, you get angry quickly, agitated quickly, anxious quickly, he kind of stops you, and says, what are you doing? What's wrong with you? And because you like him, God forbid you love him, you try to kind of refine the way you are a little bit. And over time, you realize all of a sudden you're attracted to philosophy. And let's just say he has done philosophy intellectually, but for some strange reason, you gravitate towards a sort of philosophy that makes you feel inspired. He likes to read Jean-Paul Sartre and think. You, on the other hand, you enjoy Sartre, but you also enjoy Socrates. You also enjoy Kierkegaard. You also enjoy Derrida, for example. And so what happens is all of a sudden the two of you begin to clash. You say you think, but you don't feel. And he says, yeah, you feel, but you don't think. And then you realize, well, maybe you should stop working at Pete's coffee shop, and you go to school and you major in philosophy. So you do philosophy either because of desperation, you're kind of lost in this ocean of life and you have no idea what to do, and you happen to be introverts. Introverts are really just awful temperaments if you don't know how to use it well. So you begin to read books. But books will never answer your questions. You need a living, quacking human being. But they'll probably never receive you. They wouldn't like you. Unless you have money. I'm just kidding. Anyone else? Yeah.
Do you think you have to follow the guide to follow the religion?
I'm sorry?
Do you think you have to follow the guide to follow the religion?
Do you have to follow the guide to follow the religion? The God, G-O-D or G-U-I-D-E? G-O-D? I don't know what you mean by God. Xenophon was another of those weird Greek philosophers who had argued that if the horses and the donkeys and the chimps had the creativity, the imagination to be able to draw, to write a book, they would probably have their gods in their own image. So when you say, can you worship a god, for example? Part of your question, at least, is, well, the way we usually worship anything is we have a certain projection, a certain set of images we have in our heads. Part of it is cultural, that you inherit certain things from, say, reading the Bible, listening to your parents, turning on the TV and listening to Joel Osteen, walking with your parents, and they realize that you didn't say hello to a homeless person, you didn't share some of your food, and they punish you intellectually, saying, it's nice to be compassionate, that's what it's written in the Bible, for example. And so little by little, you begin to have certain concepts given to you by the outside. And so what happens is you begin to believe, say, for example, in the Christian sense of a God, but when you go to India and you realize they have 400 different millions of gods, you say, well, what the hell is this? So your belief in God, in the Christian God, creates conflict, that you accept one version of a God but reject all the other. And so you become the creator of conflict and violence and hatred and all that. Okay. What was the other part of your question?
Okay. So you have to follow the God to follow the.
Well, I think when you say God, you're talking about a certain tradition, and those traditions, all traditions have certain steps. It's like when you realize that you're an alcoholic. Well, if you want to go through rehab, there are certain steps that you have to follow to reach your desired goal, which is no longer drinking, no longer smoking, no longer porning, whatever the case may be. And so when you talk about, say, religion, and it depends on how you want to approach religion. Some people are going through a divorce, and so they begin to read the Bible about how to cope with loss, how to cope with pain, how to cope with shame. So all of us have a certain utility. We have certain desires when we approach certain things. So, yeah. There is exoteric version of a God, and there is esoteric version of a God. It's like, and the best, simplest way I can put this for you would be the following. Imagine you would go out with someone, and let's just say you're a heterosexual, but you happen to have been, say, addicted to porn, as one of my students was a long time ago. And he says, I want to respect women, but I am so attracted to the meat that I can't see anything else. So that's the exoteric. All you see is the exterior, So that's one version of a religion that people kind of gravitate towards, and it's the easiest. It's kind of like the question that she had asked, which was, well, what do you think about Palestine? Well, you have the exoteric way of looking at injustice. It's very visible. You can see it. And you can talk about it for the rest of your life. The esoteric aspect of it is, well, the Palestinian issue, very much like the porn issue, has to do with human nature. Why is it that human beings are greedy? Why is it that human beings are violent? Why is it that human beings are proud and boastful? Why is it that we are vengeful? And so when you tackle the esoteric, you realize you're approaching or you're journeying towards a territory that you can't see, you can't touch. You really have to kind of reflect and use your head. And it's very, very tough. So the easiest thing to do, as most people do, they gravitate towards the exterior. And so if, for example, you were to go out with someone and you were only attached to their meat, or you would spend about 70% of your attention towards their meat, there comes a point, if your companion has, I suppose, any self-respect or intelligence, they'll look at you and say, listen, I think, I feel, sometimes I reflect deeply about certain things, and I'd like to share those with you. And just because I want to give you a hug, it doesn't mean I want to have sex with you. And so she pushes you, forces you to kind of begin to kind of look at it in a different way. Now, what all good teachers do, I think, I mean, some push you towards the outward, some push you towards the inward. It depends where you are. It depends what your temperament is. It depends who you meet, how they function. There are no easy answers to any of the human questions, not a single one. Good luck. Anyone else? Andrew?
Talk about letting go.
So if you were to look at the concept of letting go, if you look at it from its very genesis, in other words, you're not going to let go of anything that you're not interested in. You're not going to let go of things you're not attached to. You're not going to let go of things with which you have no history. So the idea of letting go has a certain history behind it, which means the following, that let's just say, hypothetically speaking, that you and I don't have a history. You don't know me, I don't know you. You go online and you realize that there's a class that's being taught at Laney College and you sign up for it. And you have your own expectations. You're here for 3 units, you want an A, you want to go your way. And so the first night is a bit of a surprise for you. And you say, I like it. And then the second night is, yeah, I really, really like it. Now we're in our 5th week, which means next week is our last week. And the point is, in the past like 4 or 5 weeks of you and I hanging out in this room, and once in a while in the office, you talk, and me talk, and you talk, I listen, I talk, you listen. And then once in a while, you and I exchange emails. And once in a while, you go out of your way, you stop somewhere, you buy me 5 or 10 pounds of coffee, you bring it as a gift to my office. Now, there's a good amount of history, okay? Now, I'm not going to talk about the psychological aspect of it, which is you expect me to be a certain way, and then you realize I'm not that particular way, then you're disappointed. I'm not talking about that, which means that once you realize the reality of who I am, you have to let go of the image you have created of me. That's a very, very different story, okay? Which all of us kind of make. We have no choice in that. Now, let's say you've had a relatively pleasant time in this class, and next week comes about. And remember, we are the sort of animals that we enjoy structure. It's good to be a wanderer, you know, kind of like what you read in the New or the Old Testament. Yeah, Moses was in the wilderness for about 40 years. Jesus was 30 years. And wow, that's really incredible. Yeah, it is, but it's really painful. We are not made to kind of just be wandering about, you know. And so for the past 6 weeks, you've had the structure. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you come here from 6 to 9. And then you and some of the folks in this room go out and have in and out and you talk. And then the class inspires, you go home, you can't sleep, maybe you read a little bit, you watch a little bit, you listen a little bit, and then you go to bed. And in the morning while you have your job, you listen to some audios. Jordan Peterson, who the hell cares? But it's all connected to philosophy and the world of reflection. The class ends. This external force is upon you no more. It has no imposition on you. The class has ended. And all of a sudden, you say, okay, where can I go to kind of find a similar environment where I'm forced to think and feel about things? And you try a few times only to realize, I mean, you go here, you go there, you go to church, you go to synagogue, to mosques, certain temples, you realize nothing is working. And then you find yourself very disappointed, sometimes even depressed, that you want to have similar experiences, but it's not coming your way. And then, let's say you call your therapist and you say, I need to talk to you. You go there, and the first thing the therapist will tell you is, well, the class has ended, you need to let it go. So the first thing you need to understand is you will not let anything go if you don't have a relationship with it. Now that you're talking about letting go of something with which you've had a relationship with, the question is, what kind of a relationship was it? Was it an iron relationship? Now, one of the things about relationship is that they have a good amount of space inside you. It matters very little the category into which the relationship falls. Okay? Whether you're addicted to porn or reading Plato or going to church, you have a relationship with each of these. They have a good space inside you. They create addictions. Not only does your body crave it, your mind craves it, you sometimes even dream about it. Okay? Now, there was a guy by the name of Krishnamurti some years ago, and he had argued that the idea of letting go is the following. Here, you love a woman. You realize she's not good for you, but you're emotionally and psychologically attached. You have a history with her, and the history kind of tightly bounds you to her. The more you make an effort to remove yourself from her life, the more magnetic the relationship becomes. You're pulled more towards her. And I think one of the best examples that I can give you is this. If you have to force yourself to let go, it's very similar to an orange stuck to a branch. Wants to fall, but what this tiny little orange doesn't realize is that it's green. It's not ripe enough to let go of the branch. It still needs to be cooked. And so it gets a little pinkish. It wants to fall, let go of the branch, says, I can do this on my own now, but it's not ripe enough yet. And so the orange has to wait and wait and wait and wait until something from the inside gets cooked. And the orange simply falls. You can let go of things and there are a couple of ways that the orange will fall. You can either be passive or you could be active. The problem with passive falling is the following. You're attached to this woman, but you don't exercise reflection. You don't want to understand relationships. You don't want to understand how relationships come to be. You don't really want to understand how emotions are generated. You don't really understand what history does to you, to the other person. You don't really understand the nature of desires. And so it's going to take you about 5 or 6 or 10 years. And you won't really understand it. What happens is you look yourself in the mirror. You're no longer like 44. You're like 64 now, and you're old. You're ugly, you're smelly, you're limping as you go from point A to point B, and all of a sudden you are struck that how could you have been stuck in this particular relationship for about 20 years? And then you get disgusted. And then you grow very cold, and then you say no more. And you say no more with a good amount of anger and resentment, okay? The other is active. The active means that for the first time, and this is a curious thing, I'm not quite sure how it's done. Initially, of course, very much like parents cooking for you and then feeding you. What happens is usually if you are working with the teacher is very much like a parent. He or she chops up ideas in tiny little pieces and then gives them to you. And you don't really have much, you don't have teeth, but the pieces are small enough where you can just put in your mouth, taste a little, and then swallow, and then poop it out. Now, what happens is your desire to understand, for example, relationship means that you have to to some extent, be on the outside of yourself. Watch yourself the way you watch like a movie at the theaters, Mission Impossible 7, for example. And then there is also an addition to the movie that you have to wait and watch for 25 minutes, which is behind the scenes. How is this movie made behind the scenes? What usually happens with our emotions, there is a behind scenes. You and I don't pay attention to the behind the scenes. And that's the thing that you need to understand. Things don't happen accidentally. God does not exist. You create the things that are generating in your life. And the only way you can understand them is go behind the scenes and say, so this is how it's formed. And it's going to take you some time to understand the inner components of this, and then after a while you say, okay, you just walk away. You don't need to do much. Understanding is the best gift that you can ever give yourself. But it takes time. Possible, takes time. Yeah. Anyone else? Before we... Sure. Yes. But let me explain what... I'm sorry, I didn't listen to your question, all of it. You just said, are we hollow? Oh, like an onion. Well, there are two kinds of hollowness. Yeah, I would too. Yeah, that's just not a good place. Are you cold? Do you need a jacket?
No, it's whenever I'm indoors and there's not a lot of circulation.
Oh, yeah, I know. It's okay. You know, you're more than welcome to get everybody sick. I'm just kidding. So there are two kinds of hollowness. Let's say you send me an email saying, Amir, I really need to talk to you. So, okay, fine. Now, you come to my office, despite my warning, you bring me no coffee. I say, okay, this is a woman who just doesn't think. But I forgive that part. So, okay, so what do you want to talk about? Well, I don't know, let's just say you want to talk about your boyfriend. I say for the past 5 weeks in this class, I've talked about all this other stuff. And here you are, like a 20-year-old kid, and you want to talk to me about your ridiculous boyfriend. So should I marry him? You're 20. Are you done with school? No. Well, you haven't really thought this through very much. And then I say, okay, do I really want to waste my time with all this? You know, she doesn't even have the basics. She doesn't have the alphabets. She doesn't even have teeth, and yet she's ordered like a New York steak. I entertain you for 5-10 minutes, and I say, oh, my phone, I'm sorry, I really need to take this. And you say, well, who is it? I say, it's God. You need to leave right away. Now, this is the hollowness, one aspect of it, that let's say it's 2,000 years ago, you go to Pete's and you run into a Socrates. And Socrates asks you, well, who are you? My name is Joe. I know what your name is. When I say who are you, I mean, what is your function? What is your purpose? What sort of an animal are you? You know. And then you begin to mumble and he just walks away. He finds you hollow. Now, there is another aspect of the hollowness that the Indians talk about, is that there is a self, okay? But there are these selves that kind of cover all these other selves. Now, let me give you an example. There is the self that's made up of iron. You have all these pleasures, and they're good. There's nothing wrong with them, okay? And there is also the instinctual self, that they're very organic. You don't have to think about them. You have to reflect on them. They just happen. Okay. There is the cultural self. You were born in a Christian family, so you become a Christian. Okay. There is also a political self. Let's just say you happen to be a person of color, and that particular group of people have been kind of pushed around by culture, by society, the dominant group of people. And so you have a great amount of emotions. Anger, envy. You also have an intellectual self, which is, well, you've sat and you've thought about this and that for a while. So you have all the stuff. Now, for the Hindus, what they argue is that, well, let's get rid of the cultural self. Let's get rid of the traditional self. Let's get rid of the personal experiences self. I'm married, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm this, I'm that. Once you get rid of all the stuff, what you have is a no self. And by no self, I mean you now live in this darkness. You have no idea who you are. You are without a purpose, without a goal. No purpose, no goal that is rooted in instincts, in politics, in religion, in personal experiences. Your five senses, for the most part, have been diminished. Nothing about you works. You're like a car whose engine is broke. You're in the middle of the highway. Now, you are an easy prey for a culture such as this. They'll tell you need to drink. If you don't want to drink, you can smoke. If you don't want to smoke, go on cheap dates. If you don't want to do that, well, listen to Jordan Peterson. You don't want to do that, listen to Eckhart Tolle. Okay? Now, once you become hollow in this particular culture, then you become a victim to all sorts of advertisements. In more traditional settings, in a culture where such hollowness are deemed valuable and worthy, you know, the idea that the kingdom of God lives inside you, that may be very, very, very true. I don't know if it's true, but it may be true. But this kingdom of God is deep inside you. You know, it's like all of a sudden you remember that you put 20 bucks in a jacket. You open the closet and you have 50 jackets, and each jacket has 20 pockets. You have lost the 20. You know where the 20 is, but you have to go through 50 jackets, each having 20 pockets. Okay? And let's just say all these jackets that you have look the same. So every jacket that you thoroughly examine, when you realize it doesn't have the $20 bill that you're looking for, you have to put it on the side. So as you go through all these layers, you put them on the side. You will no longer go back to them. Now you're hollow. Now you can't do this on your own. It's impossible. No one can do it. See, if, for example, your friend calls you and says, right now, in the middle of our talk, and say, I need to talk to someone. Can you come over? So, are you stupid? I have a class. I'm not going to come over. I'll be there at 9:30. If, on the other hand, if you had just met this man or this woman, and after 2 weeks of being around this person, you had grown to intensely love them, sure, for all the stupid reasons, but nevertheless, you love them. And should you get a text right now, you're going to say, Amir, I'm really, really sorry. An emergency. And it's because of this passion you have with this person, you're willing to sacrifice. In other words, what are you sacrificing? These people, this classroom, the talk, me, potentially failing the class, experiencing my wrath the next time we meet. But you're willing to do all of that because you love. Now that is called becoming hollow. Now, if you get a call from a friend, at least you know you love him or her. You can touch, you can smell, you can see, you can hear. But this other stuff, the kingdom of God, this hollowness that the Indians talk about, the Atman, in a culture such as this, 21st century, American mentality or Western mentality, where most of these ideas have been kind of wrestled with profoundly intellectually, you know. So you take one step forward and five back. There's a good amount of doubt. So is there a hollowness to you? Yes. Someone needs to remove all this other stuff. And there are these different stages that happen. Initially, you know, the love is fine. You're inspired, you make the sacrifice. Then you realize you don't love as intensely, but you're profoundly interested in the ideas. You say, well, I don't feel, but I'm interested. The devotion begins to change. Your attachment begins to change. You know, and we are the sort of animals that we are guided by our feelings, not so much by our intellect. We don't like to think. That's not what we do. First you feel, then you move, then disaster hits, then you think. Anyone else?
How do you choose what books to read?
You know, ideas are very much, I'm just going to assume that you're a heterosexual woman. Ideas are very much like men, in the sense that each book has a cover, like every man has a face, okay? And as every man opens his mouth to speak, you open every book and you read a couple of lines. Some men inspire you, some men don't. Some books inspire you, some books don't. Some books take a long time for you to realize, oh, this is relatively interesting, very much like men. Now, with some men you realize, well, it's just only good to talk. Very much like a book. You read a couple of pages and you put it away. With some men you realize it's good to talk and have some coffee. You take the book here and there with you. Just in case you have some spare time, you sit and read. You realize that some men are worth your time, so you have dinner with them. It's about 4 or 5 hour period, right? And with some men you say, well, you know, like what high school people do, let's go study, you're my boyfriend. With some books you just carry them all the time until the time is past, and you look at them and you realize they're no good anymore. Now, it also depends on your history. If, for example, you've had a relatively traumatic past, well, you're not going to read books that does not speak of trauma. If you're in a certain space where you desperately want to find yourself a boyfriend, you're not going to read books on religion. You're going to read books how to cope with being single, how to cope with divorce. So it's all about within the context of relationships. So it depends where you are exactly. Now, if on the other hand, if for example you enjoy Beyonce, well, what you're going to do is you're going to buy all of her albums. You're going to kind of buy all of her shoes if you can afford them. You're going to make your hair the way hers is. You're going to sing the way she does. If on the other hand you have come to enjoy Mother Teresa, for example, well, you're no longer enjoying the complexities and the richness, the fullness, the shallowness of Beyonce's life. You're going to look at the simplicity of Mother Teresa's life, which is very rich in its own way. So some of it has to do with your experience, your temperament, what around you force you to read, such as, for example, this class. Or, as we talked earlier, should you run into a Socrates? Should you be attracted to Socrates? You will want to know more about the ideas given to you by Socrates. In a culture where you have a lot of new age teachers and most of them are just filled with fluff, my recommendation is read good books. Don't follow anyone, don't listen to anyone, just read good books. And if you don't like to read books, watch Harry Potter. Anyone else? Oh, yes, of course. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
I read quite a while ago something about there's this idea that if you lived a good life in death, you actually won't smell so bad. You know how like dead bodies rot and smell. Like, is that? I think I read it also because it may remind me of when you said Mother Teresa. They were saying she was so like fully in her mission, and she did so much good in the world that when she died, it's like she would smell more like a rose rather than. I mean, is that like a?
I've heard such things as well. I haven't really seen it firsthand, so I can't really, comment on it. I hope it's true. Yeah. But I don't know. It sounds fantastically true. It's very exotic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of like speaking to, kind of like how they say, like, what you eat, your body is going to reflect that. And I think that it's
Yeah.
the same sort of thing, like how you live your life is going to reflect how you die.
Yeah. There are tons of stories. One of the people that I enjoy very much, his name is G.I. Gurdjieff, Armenian philosopher. He was a practitioner of philosophy, not a theoretician. When he died, it's been said that the power in the church went out. There was a tiny earthquake, storm hit, and then he remained in the coffin for a few days, and his body didn't decompose. It wasn't smelly at all. But I think that's usually what happens when you love someone, as he was loved by many of his disciples. And when you're loved, and it may be true in his case, I don't really know, but I think students have a tendency of creating fantastic stories about their teachers. And it's really, really good. It doesn't need to be true for you and I, but it's true for them. And these are actually good stories to just have in the back of your head, just in case at a certain point in your life you desire to kind of go through some transformations. You know, the idea that when you die you're not going to smell bad. It's a very positive outlook about your own death. Anyone else? Before we... No one? Yeah.
What kind of thought process do you go through when you try to translate poems?
You know, let me say a couple of things about writing. Sometimes you write because you have a purpose. In other words, it's like when you play chess. You know, you can see about 40, 50 moves ahead of you. Something that Magnus Carlsen does. It doesn't mean he wins all the time, but it does mean that he's going to be world champion for a few decades, you know. I think what happens for most of us, we are inspired and writing just happens automatically. And there are some aspects of writing that does not really involve you. It oozes out of you. It's how the Course in Miracles was written. It's how Conversations with God was written. And that you become a conduit to some interesting, exciting, fantastic force out there. And you simply become a channel, you know. And then you wake from it and you say, wow, I just wrote 10 pages. Sometimes you write because in writing you begin to discover certain parts of your own psyche. Sometimes you discover certain parts of a certain word and the emotions therein. But like anything else, as you become more proficient, you begin to look at a variety of different angles as to how you need to approach. You know, watch this, go on YouTube and watch Larry Hahn. He's a framer. You know, he builds, he's dead now. He builds houses, and it's interesting the way he explains things. And you watch him because of about 40 years of experience. He lets you know about all the notes and all the footnotes. It's beautiful to watch. With this saw you can do this. With that saw you can do this. With this nail gun you can do A, B, C, D. And it's wonderful to watch, you know. Yeah. If there is a writer that you enjoy, if there is someone like Jordan Peterson that you enjoy, for example, and I keep mentioning this because around this table of all these New Age gurus, he happens to be the most honest and the most articulate. Okay? If, for example, you watch anyone that you enjoy doing anything, if you're inspired to follow in their footsteps, in other words, if you watch Beyonce and you love the way she sings and you love the way she looks, inside you grows this thing called envy. Now, envy is rooted in beauty. There is something about Beyonce that you enjoy. It inspires you. You want that for yourself. That's a good envy to have. Okay? I'm not talking about the sort of envy that leads you to that movie that came out some years ago, Fatal Attraction. You know, where you want what she has, you realize that you can't get it, so you just go kill her. And when Beyonce is not there, well, you know, the beauty goes away and you just go into forgetfulness and that's it. If on the other hand, you want what someone else has, you start practicing until you become good. And then hopefully you'll kind of realize your capacity as you keep training yourself. And you don't have to become Beyonce. You can just be one of those lowly single in a club somewhere, but you're content. You've come to realize your capacity. So some envies are really, really good. So if there are things out there that you enjoy, you know, it is because something about what you have seen or heard or whatever has inspired you, gave you a touch of beauty. Yeah. Anyone else? Okay. You sure?
A stupid one.
There are no questions that are intelligent.
So I went down a rabbit hole this weekend about this kind of soft UFO disclosure thing that's happening.
Okay.
But like during the Apollo missions, they put the question to a lot of think tanks about what if there were artifacts with some sort of proof. They all kind of unanimously said just shut up about it because it would be the end of society and religion and everything. And now there seems to be some kind of softish progressive disclosure happening, and it's just a sound bite, it seems like. Are they wrong, or has society changed that much in the last 50 years? Like, why is it not making much of a splash?
I don't know much about those things, and I can't say I'm very interested unless I go home and my wife has turned into an alien. I think oftentimes she is, but I try to not look at it like that.